Based on the feedback we receive here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, from Miami fans concerning the performance of Mark Richt and his football team over the past one season plus 3 games at the finale of 2017, the news that we were hit with just a few minutes ago probably goes over rather well. Again, this is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, and I was preparing to do some analysis and some insight into the teams that played yesterday, most notably, of course, Clemson, Alabama, and then also Oklahoma and Notre Dame, and more specifically, some comments that Brian Kelly, the Notre Dame head coach, made after the game about his team's ability to stay athletically with the likes of Clemson. And so I was going to address that when I started to do some research just minutes ago and discovered that Mark Richt has announced his retirement from the University of Miami. So he has not left necessarily that job, but the way it's phrased here is that he is retiring. So we will see in the coming years as to whether Mark Richt is just getting out of the situation at Miami and ultimately will plan on coaching again, because he would be, despite some of the failings at Miami, a prime candidate for jobs all over the country, or in fact, he, as a relatively young man, I'm going to find out here in the next few minutes how old Mark Richt is, that he doesn't come across as a very old guy. He played at the University of Miami. I believe his senior season was either 1980 or 81, which would make him about 60, something in that range. So certainly of retirement age or close to it, and certainly with enough money in the bank. Unless he completely blew it. If he had any financial wisdom, he is set for life and doing just fine. Therefore, he may have just had it with coaching, had it with the grind, and it is a grind. And regardless of what you feel or think about the particular performance of a head coach, we at least have to respect the work that they put in. Yes, some outwork others. Steve Spurrier, at various moments in his and various stretches of his coaching tenures, both at South Carolina in particular, because that was his last stop, and he had established himself as one of the best, but also with the Washington Redskins and with Florida, wasn't necessarily considered the hardest worker. I don't know that Mark Richt is placed in that category like an Urban Meyer, like an Nick Saban, and certainly a lot of guys that have moved on to the NFL who are known for their work ethic, sleeping in the office, grinding away 20 hours a day. But even for those guys that are a step below in regards to work ethic and approach, they are still devoting their life to football. And Mark Richt is in that category. I'm going to read the article from ESPN because I know nothing else except for Mark Richt has said that he's going to retire and has retired from the University of Miami. And when I say retire, and then I mention the University of Miami, when somebody states that they're retiring, that calls into question whether this is a true retirement or just a dismissal or a choice to leave that particular job. Such was the case a few weeks ago with Urban Meyer. And nobody knows what the mindset is currently for an Urban Meyer or a Mark Richt versus what they're going to choose to do or what may tempt them or intrigue them in the coaching circles a year from now or 5 years from now. So let me read the article, and then I'll get to the live chat, and I'll certainly pass along and communicate my thoughts about Mark Richt's tenure at Miami and overall. So this is written by Mark Schlabach, ESPN senior writer. Miami coach Mark Richt announced his retirement Sunday after compiling a 26-13 record the past 3 seasons at his alma mater. Richt's announcement came only 3 days after the Hurricanes lost to Wisconsin 35-3 in the New Era Pinstripe Bowl, which dropped their record to 7-6. In a statement, Richt, 58, said he informed Miami Athletic Director Blake James of his decision on Sunday morning. The decision came after a great deal of thought, discussions with my family, and prayer, Richt said in the statement. This was my decision. The University of Miami has been a part of my life for more than 3 decades. It shaped me as a young man and provided me with the coaching opportunity of a lifetime. My love for the U is simply great. My true desire is for our football program to return to greatness. And while terribly difficult, I feel that stepping down is in the best interest of the program. Richt, a former Hurricanes quarterback, was hired to revive the program shortly after he was fired after 15 seasons as Georgia's coach in November of 2015. Richt had a 145-51 record with the Bulldogs, leading them to 2 SEC championships in 2002 and 2005. Richt's first 2 seasons at Miami were promising as the Hurricanes went 9-4 in 2016 and then started 10-0 in 2017. So we are only 13 months removed from Mark Richt in his second season at Miami, the first of which he won a bowl game, the first bowl win for the university in 11 seasons, and completing a 9-4 season with an impressive showing against West Virginia. And then starting off a 10-0, and despite some of the near misses or the close wins, still 10-0. And ranked as high as number 2 or 3 in the country, I believe. Here we are 13 months later after losing the final 3 and going 7-6. That's 7 wins and 9 losses for Miami since then, with what would be considered the best talent in the ACC Coastal Division. Okay, so again, then started 10-0 in 2017. But after climbing to number 2 in the college football playoff rankings and introducing the college football world to the turnover chain, Miami lost its last 3 games in 2017, including a 38-3 defeat to Clemson in the ACC championship game. This past season, the Hurricanes started 5-1, lost 4 in a row, and then won their final 2 regular season games before their ugly performance in the bowl game. Miami fans and former players criticized Richt for not changing his pro-style offense, juggling quarterbacks throughout this past season. The Hurricanes ranked 13th in the ACC in total offense at 359 yards per game, 12th in passing, 9th in scoring. Miami's defense was among the best in the FBS, allowing only 19.5 points per game. Hurricanes defensive coordinator Manny Diaz was named Temple's new coach earlier this month. Miami is also losing its leading rusher, Travis Homer, who announced Sunday that he is hiring an agent and turning pro. Homer rushed for 985 yards this season, 6 yards a carry, 966 as a sophomore last year. Former Miami coach Butch Davis, who guided Florida International to a 9-4 record this past season, is expected to be among the candidates Miami could consider. Oregon's Mario Cristobal, a former Miami player and assistant, might also be in the mix. 2 coaches that have been talked about here on our channel and by you, the fans. So let's go to the live chat because I'm sure that many of you are on here. We've got quite a few people on right now. All right, let's go to the live chat and see what you guys have to say. And I'll certainly provide my thoughts as well, which are going to be a restatement of what I've said over the past several months concerning Mark Richt and his performance. I think I've been pretty balanced. The guy is obviously a capable head coach. Is he an elite head coach? Probably not. And since he's announced his retirement, probably will never coach again. Probably. He will never reach that status. He never won a national championship. He never won consistently at an elite status at Georgia, and certainly did not attain that in Miami. The program took a step back after initially taking strides forward. All right. Let's see what you guys have. All right, off the top, Mark Richt is overrated. Okay, anytime that that comment is thrown out, I understand that you're saying that for some odd reason. You're saying that based on your perception of where he's rated. I don't know what rating you're going by that he's rated. Where is Mark Richt rated? So to say that he's overrated, you would have to have a perception that he is being rated at some particular level by somebody or by the media and analysts in general. So I don't know whether he's overrated or underrated because I haven't necessarily seen any rankings of coaches that have gone down to Mark Richt's level. It's always Urban Meyer, Nick Saban, and Dabo Swinney, and those guys. Certainly, he's not attained and accomplished what they've done. He's not as good as they are and have been. I rated him. I would have to go back and look prior to this season. So we're going back probably 7 or 8 months, sometime after last season. I rated coaches in the ACC, and I rated him somewhere in the top 3 to 4. I would have to dig up that video. And obviously, Dabo Swinney's the best coach in the ACC. And then after that, it was difficult to differentiate. That was the most difficult conference for me to rank the coaches. The other ones, it was very cut and dry that there was a tiered system based on accomplishments, wins and losses, championships, but also recruiting, and also based on the resources that they had at their disposal and the difficulty and challenges they had at different programs, like a Duke that doesn't exist at a Miami or a Florida State, certainly. All right. Never compare Mark to Steve. Applewhite fired. Okay, Bama's day is coming. Things that go up must go down. All right, Mr. Rogers on the line. Applewhite can't coach. Okay, so we're talking about Major Applewhite is out. So we'll get to that later. I didn't know that. Major Applewhite out. 15-10 in 2 seasons, 10-6 in conference play. At the school, fired after only 2 seasons. One of those losses was 70-14 to Army. Okay. Anthony Battles asks, who is out there that is right as a fit for Miami type football? So the 2 names that we've mentioned many times and were mentioned in the Schlabach article were Mario Cristobal, who's got ties to Miami, played there, assistant coach there, and certainly has done a nice job at Oregon thus far. And is doing a great job in the recruiting rankings right now, bringing in top players to Oregon, including the #1 ranked player in the nation. And then, of course, you've got Butch Davis, who is coaching at the Group of 5 level with FIU and winning. And, of course, won at the U. Possibly could have or would have won a national championship had he been given the opportunity instead of Florida State in 2000. And obviously that Miami team beat Florida State head-to-head with Butch Davis on the sideline and was deprived of playing in the national championship game. And so was Washington, which beat Miami head-to-head. And for those of you who don't know, this is the BCS era. 2000, Oklahoma was undefeated. Miami, Florida State, and Washington all lost 1 game. Miami was coached by Butch Davis, who could be a candidate for this job, but they were not chosen by the BCS formula and the writers and the coaches poll to go to the BCS championship game. But then they went and they took care of business at the Sugar Bowl against Florida. All right. Schnellenberger is available. Howard Schnellenberger is how old now? All right. I don't want any coach that's unproven or been fired from their job. Highly favored 305. Shout out Alonzo and 786 Gaines for breaking the news way before mainstream outlets. Will Muschamp is next. Any chance Brent Venables might be interested? Brent Venables must be either just completely satisfied as a defensive coordinator or looking for just the right job, the right fit, the right location, the right place where he thinks he can win big. He is obviously not just going to take any Power 5 job because he hasn't taken that step and he's had the opportunity. Kiffin looks nice. Lane Kiffin. Matt Canada. Richt could have stayed. All he needed to do was get a coordinator on the offense, but he couldn't get rid of his kid, though. Yeah, I would have been interested to see if Mark Richt could have won big at Miami had he again hired an offensive coordinator. I think the criticisms of his offense are valid. If you paid attention to the analysis during the bowl game, the analysis was very fair, and I forget who was doing the color analyst role for ESPN during the Pinstripe Bowl, but they were excellent and on the money in their very professional criticism of Mark Richt's offense and some of the opportunities that they should have had against Wisconsin and some of the obvious reads and some of the obvious looks that they were giving Wisconsin that was playing right into the Badgers' hands and making it very easy to defend Miami's offense. So why Mark Richt couldn't recognize that, or maybe he did, I can't imagine that he was that prideful. Maybe he is, to not give up reins at the offense. I just, in putting myself in that position, sure, Mark Richt knows offensive football. He could certainly contribute to the offensive game plan, give his insight. You don't go from being a excellent play caller and offensive coordinator to being a complete moron, but the game has changed. Therefore, it was obvious that he needed severe help. He needed to step back. He needed to be strictly head coach, and he needed to give those reins to somebody else and then just have his input. Urban Meyer's a great example of that, an offensive mind, a guy that has been very accomplished as an offensive mind, but not being the play caller, being the offensive coordinator, but having the input, the oversight of it. And there's a lot of other decent examples, I'm sure. I'm trying to think. Anybody else? Obviously, Jim Harbaugh is a guy who has an offensive background as a quarterback and then as a coach of quarterbacks and developing quarterbacks. And so he develops and puts in his system at Michigan, but allows others to call the plays and be the offensive coordinator. All right. So I'm seeing on the live chat, and this is pretty amazing, if this is accurate, that Alonzo and 786 broke the news. Did these guys break the news? And I don't know how long this has been out. I was up late last night. I got up. I had other things to do. I started watching the NFL, and then I started to dig into my research of what I was going to prepare for today in my analysis of college football. And again, I was going to focus on Clemson, Notre Dame, Alabama, and Oklahoma, and specifically the comments that Brian Kelly made after the Clemson game, in which he stated that his team was fast enough, athletic enough, and that there was not a big gap between them and Clemson. They just didn't execute. And I had much to say about that. And I went online and I see that Mark Richt retired. Butch, Cristobal, or Manny, if he can get out of his contract. Charles Orozco is letting us know. Those are his thoughts. Tony Elliott. Gamecock fan, USC Gamecock fan, Miami, please take Will Muschamp from us. Don't think that's going to happen. Jeff Brom's an interesting candidate, NCIS Fanatic 21. Interesting candidate. Shout out to Alonzo and 786 for breaking the news before mainstream outlets. They never get the credit they deserve. I find this fascinating. So I'll have to talk to Zoe. I'll hit him up on a text, see what's going on, and see where and when he found out. DeAndre, of course, likes to bring up the 58-0 game from a few years ago. That wasn't even the last time, of course, Clemson and Miami played. 38-3, 58-0. What's the difference? All right. NCIS Fanatic 21. You know what I'm going to do when you bring up 31-24 and you bring up 36-24 from the last two times Ohio State, or not even the last two times Ohio State and Miami played. I'm going to throw you. Got to be fair. 2011, Miami 24, Ohio State 6. All right. Eric Dumford Butch. Also, Kaya is pushing for Coley to come back as quarterbacks coach. MCD Sports 4. Miami will be 6-6 next year. Well, I think that's jumping the gun on a prediction, but hey. Clemson and Miami fighting. Scroll up, Mark. I scrolled all the way to the top. Navy, are we sure Miami didn't force Mark Richt out? I don't know that. Who knows what happened there? Either he just doesn't have it in him to continue the grind, and he is tired of being beat down by the media, being beat down by the fan base, and thinking, okay, I just don't want any more of this. Maybe he doesn't want to deal with a bunch of 20-year-olds anymore. And he's got plenty of money in the bank and just thinks, hey, you know what? I could stand on the sidelines for a couple more years and they may keep me around if I go 8-4, but they're not going to be happy. And I just don't have it in me to hit the recruiting path. Maybe what's going on in recruiting right now has opened his eyes. Recruiting is a grind. And there are a number of coaches who just aren't up to it. And especially as they age. And of course, the assistants and the staff, the coordinators, and your recruiting specialists, they're out front in that and doing the real grunge work in contacting these prospects and hitting the path. But the head coach has to be out there too. So it's a grind to recruit. And a lot of guys at 58 years old don't necessarily have it in them to keep that going. And consider the recent downturn in recruiting. He may be thinking, you know what? I've had a couple top 10 classes. I thought this one was going to work out. It is plummeting like the stock market right now. And I just don't have it in me to get out there and sell this place and sell what I'm doing. And I've been hit with a lot of negative feedback on how I've handled things. And you can have it. Or maybe he was this stubborn about the offensive coordinator position, and Miami did come to him and say, Mark, you can keep your job. We need an offensive coordinator. It's obvious that we are more than struggling. What's the next word after struggling? We are in the dark ages offensively, and we need a change. You need to change. You need to step back and hire an offensive coordinator. We need to get somebody on the staff with a bright mind, up-to-date concepts that we need to implement. And maybe Mark Richt was too stubborn. I don't think so, but I don't know the man. Maybe. Miami didn't want to wait 15 years like Georgia did. So Mr. Rogers, no relation, of course. Mr. Rogers, I have yet to see your handle on MarkRogersTV, so I always welcome everyone that I see for the first time to MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Mark Richt had a tremendous run at Georgia. Let's not let that be lost. So yes, Georgia did not win a national championship with Mark Richt at the helm. I think most of us would agree that Virginia Tech was successful under Frank Beamer, Kansas State under Bill Snyder, Oregon with Chip Kelly. Anybody else? Dan Mullen, Mississippi State. There are certain circumstances in play. Of course, Mark Richt had more resources at Georgia, both in regards to money and resources and recruiting base than those other places, most of the other places that I named. So the standard and the expectation should be higher. And it doesn't look good on him that Kirby Smart has that thing on a roll. But he won at Georgia, and he played well, and his teams played well, and they performed well, and he won consistently. And I find it funny that on a regular basis, when Mark Richt's tenure at Georgia is brought up, in light of him being at Miami now, that people say, well, Mark Richt, this is the kind of game that Mark Richt blew at Georgia, that he would let a team upset his Georgia Bulldogs. And that actually wasn't the case. If you look back at Mark Richt's tenure for 15 years at Georgia, they won the games they were supposed to win. They rarely got upset. They won the games they were supposed to win. The mark of a truly great coach is to be able to, and I'll use Urban Meyer as an example because the numbers out there, and they were an underdog against Michigan this year, that Urban Meyer went 7-0 as an underdog at Ohio State. against the likes of Michigan, Michigan State, Alabama, Oregon, Wisconsin. 7-0. When you are able to somewhat consistently, of course, when you're an underdog, there's a reason you're an underdog. And typically, even the best coaches, Nick Saban, the times that he's been an underdog, which has been basically never in the last 5 or 6 years, but going back before that, he lost most of the games that he was an underdog because there was a reason that his team was the underdog. They were not as good as the other team. But great coaches are able to take lesser talent and beat better talent occasionally on a fairly regular basis. Not consistently, because again, you've got less talent, and that's when you typically lose your games, is when you match up against a team with more talent. Now that Nick Saban has more talent than anyone, he's not losing hardly any games ever. When he had the same or similar talent, maybe at LSU, Nick Saban would lose 2 games or 3 games. His first Alabama team certainly lost 6 games because his talent wasn't as good. But I'm sure if we looked back, and again, Urban Meyer's a great example, Nick Saban would be as well, although I don't have the numbers at the top of my head. And again, he's not been an underdog one time in like 8 years by 1 point to Georgia and Mark Richt in 2015, and they won that game 38-10. But that was the mark against Mark Richt in my book. And other people need to do their research because they would typically say Mark Richt, they would use that Pitt Miami game as an example from last year. This is Mark Richt. This is what he brings. He lets his team down and they get upset by an inferior team. Actually, that's not what happened at Georgia. Georgia would win the 9 or 10 games that they were supposed to. And then when they matched up against a Florida in particular, or a Tennessee at times, that was as good as them, Mark Richt didn't win those games. And that's the mark of a truly great head coach who's able to overcome a slight disparity in talent to win a lot of those games. And Mark Richt at Georgia didn't win those games. His team hummed along with better talent than 9 or 10 teams on their schedule and won those games. And you can check the record and check who they lost to. And I'm not saying over 15 years that his teams never got upset. Of course, they lost games. They were upset. Nick Saban's teams were upset. Urban Meyer's teams were upset. So everybody gets upset at some point. So Mark Richt did lose upset games at Georgia, but not very often at all. His teams lost the games they were supposed to win. He was not able to overcome a talented differential with great coaching. That's what I consider to be the mark against Mark Richt at Georgia, to be the biggest negative against Mark Richt being considered a great coach at Georgia, was that he was never able to, and when I say never, I mean almost never, there's probably an example or two, but taking an underdog Georgia team and beating somebody better. He didn't do that. All right. Jeff Brom, yes, an interesting candidate. Mario Cristobal, Butch Davis, Mike Leach, and CIS Fanatic 21, really going through it. Navy Thomas wants me to scroll up. I think you mean that scroll down. I've started from the top. Butch Davis will put us back on sanctions. Mr. Rogers, okay? Bring back Jimmy Johnson. Cash Boy, what are you laughing at? Okay. Cristobal is not leaving from Oregon. Get real. And then the chat just jumped on me. I'll start from the bottom here. I definitely don't want Mike Leach. Tony Kidd does not want Mike Leach. Clemson alum 98 thinks that Leach would be amazing at Miami. Jalen Hurts is staying. He enrolled in grad school a week ago at Alabama. Miami Hurricanes need to bring it back Manny Diaz. Scott Frost. Well, you understand, Jimmy, what the ties are with Scott Frost in Nebraska. So that's a different sort of case. That's like pulling who's at their alma mater right now. Scott Frost. Scott Frost has been waiting to coach at Nebraska, and it's going to be difficult to get him, I would think, although it would be more difficult for him to win at Nebraska than it would be for him to go to Miami and win. It's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's Reasonable Gut, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. What's going on, man?
Hey, I wanted to. I saw the news and also saw that you weren't live and talking about it. So I wanted to discuss Mark Richt's tenure at Georgia a little bit because I'm not quite understanding the point you're making about or a point. Your counterpoint against people who say Mark Richt was underwhelming and didn't win the games he was supposed to win at Georgia.
Okay, let me start over then.
Go ahead.
Okay, as soon as Miami lost that game to Pitt last year, when they were 10-0 and Pitt was 4-6, I heard for months and still do to this day, that's Mark Richt, and that's what he brings to the table. His teams are not prepared, and they get upset by lesser teams, and that's what happened at Georgia. But that's not what happened at Georgia. If you go through Mark Richt's tenure at Georgia over 15 years, his teams took care of business when they were supposed to. The games that they lost were against the teams that had like talent or slightly better talent. Mark Richt was not able to win those 2 or 3 games a year in which his team had similar talent or a little bit lesser talent. The criticism I have of Mark Richt was not that his teams were upset at an abnormal rate, but that he was incapable of taking lesser talent or sometimes similar talent and beating teams on a regular basis.
All right, let me first make I guess this might be a subjective view, but you said upset on an abnormal rate.
Everybody gets upset.
I would consider, okay, people are probably remembering mostly the last decade of college football, starting with like 2008 and onward to 2018. I would consider getting upset once a year, which was somewhere around that range of what he was doing, would be abnormal. Particularly, this is the time he was doing this in the SEC during the time of the BCS championship when there was only 2 teams trying to get in. If you lost one game, that was huge back then. You could lose one game, you could trip up one now. Now, for example, in 2013, they lost to Vanderbilt. I don't care what kind of talent Georgia has. Losing to Vanderbilt is an upset.
Sure.
They also lost 4 other games that year, by the way, but I'm just focusing on the Vanderbilt one. If we want to say inferior talent, the year before they lost to South Carolina and Michigan State in the bowl game. I actually remember watching that.
Okay.
They looked sickly. In 2010, good Lord, they lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games. One of them to the Liberty Bowl against guess who? UCF. 4 of those were in a row. One was to Colorado. Now, I don't. My memory's not as good, not that good to go back and see how well Colorado was in 2010. But it just doesn't sound good. Because even if we want to say most of those games he was playing at teams either at their talent level or above their talent level, one of those has to be an upset. Either if you want to say it's the Colorado one or South Carolina. Oh, and Mark Richt didn't have exactly a great year, a great tenure against Tennessee either in this past decade. When I say great, I mean you need to be beating Tennessee and losing maybe one game because Tennessee really wasn't that bad this past decade. I know they're not historically, but and Georgia was known to lose to them here and there. It's just things like that. I think it's and mostly Georgia fans. Even this is where I'm getting this from. Is they didn't want him there. It's because of stuff like this. It's because he was taking them routinely to 7 and 8 game win season.
No, he was not. No. I'm looking at his record right now. He won double digits 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And you got to take out the last year because he didn't get to coach the bowl game. 11 out of 15 years he won double digits. 11 out of 15 years.
Okay. But
So the point I'm making, reasonable Gump, if we're going to make Urban Meyer and Nick Saban the standard, we got to take those two guys out of it, because if we're going to compare every coach to them, then because those guys are two of the top 5 coaches in the history of the game, their winning percentage, Saban's got the titles, Urban Meyer's got the winning percentage that's just ridiculous. He had an 8-5 year at Florida. Other than that, he lost like 1 game a year. So those two guys are they're on the Mount Rushmore. Okay, if you're going to compare Mark Richt to his contemporaries, like a Les Miles, like a Mac Brown, like those kind of guys, he's right there. It's an argument that he's in that category. Not a great coach. I never called him a great coach. I said a number of times, not a great coach, but his teams performed well. They were contenders. They consistently won at Georgia. They were consistent winners. He finished in the top 10, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times in 15 years and finished ranked all but 3 years. He consistently won.
Right. He won most of his games. I'm not denying that. But when you're sitting on the absolute gold mine of talent,
absolutely, you're right.
You have no competition other than actually Georgia Tech isn't competition. And back then, Clemson wasn't either. There's no excuse for him ever losing more. There's no excuse for him going less than 11-1. To be perfectly honest.
Well, come on. Okay.
LSU both year. When I know you said he finished double digits in most of those years. I think they had to win a bowl game to do some of that.
Well, he won a lot of bowl games.
They lost a lot too. He won most of his games. I'm not denying that. But what I'm trying to say is when you have that much talent and you're having it all stole from you because you're not apparently because you don't know how to keep it in state. It's just underwhelming.
He has a better bowl record than Nick Saban does.
And how many national championships?
I'm not comparing him. I never came on here comparing him by any stretch to Nick Saban, Urban. Those guys are. I'm just making a statement of fact that he has a better bowl record than Nick Saban. I never called him a great coach by any stretch. I just said that he had a good run at Georgia. And you need to understand as well that we are looking at Mark Richt's tenure versus what Kirby Smart's doing. So absolutely, if Kirby Smart continues to do what he's doing right now at Georgia, he's a far better legacy and coach than Mark Richt, and it's not even arguable. But we also have to look at what Mark Richt did for 15 years at Georgia and look at what was being done at Georgia in the 80s and 90s. So if you look at Vince Dooley's last several seasons and then through the Ray Goff years and Jim Donnan, Mark Richt improved that program considerably. Those are the guys that were going 7-5 and 8-4 over and over and over. Most of the time. Sure, they had a 10-win season every once in a while, but he's the guy that started to win consistently at Georgia, and that wasn't being done for the 20 years before that. About the 15 years before that.
All right. I wasn't trying to come on here and compare him to Nick Saban. That's the point I was trying.
I'm sure not trying to do that.
You just said, well, you just threw out a line. He has a better bowl record, so I felt the need to throw back that he had no championships. Anyway, I don't care. That's not what I'm on here to do. There's just got to. I'm just trying to say Mark Richt came across as underwhelming at Georgia. Whether for whatever reason, we want to go by. The fact of the matter is, most Georgia fans were not unhappy when he left, and most of them are on record for telling Miami, "This is what's coming to you." And they all proved to be right somehow. By the way, Miami, another gold mine of recruiting, or it should be at least. I mean, I probably sound like I'm yelling right now, and I'm not. I'm not mad. I'm not aggravated or anything.
I did not get to my analysis of Mark Richt's performance at Miami. I've been saying for weeks and months that Mark Richt completely mishandled the quarterback situation, has botched recruiting, and his teams performed in a very uninspired way against a division that they should dominate. So, yeah, his Miami stay went from being promising and decent to awful failure. Yeah, I didn't get into the Miami review.
I didn't mean to. I didn't mean. I didn't mean to either. If I wanted to compare him to coaches and say that, he's right around the same range, I think Les Miles is a good comparison. They both sat on gold mines of talent. Les Miles managed to win a championship. Managed to make it to another championship.
Yeah.
So we can make of that what we will. But I can empathize more with mainly Georgia fans who feel like he was there for 10 to 15 years, won a lot of games, and they just probably felt like they never really got what they should have been getting. And it's hard to argue with them again because college football starts at recruiting and talent. And if you can't do that in Georgia, one of the top 4 states to put out talent, and you have no competition other than out of state, it's not good. It's not doing. It's not living up to the expectation. That's the best way to put it.
So I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on Mark Richt's recruiting efforts at Georgia. My take would be, before I research it, that he probably had top 10 talent most of the time, and he pretty much fulfilled that talent most of the time, and sometimes he failed to deliver, but he generally had top 10 to 15 talent, and that's where Georgia generally finished. They didn't win championships. They didn't complete championship seasons. They finished in the top 10 or 15 consistently. And I even made the statement in a conversation and have a number of times that I totally understand why Georgia would let go of Mark Richt and why Les Miles would let go of LSU would let go of Les Miles, because they were being paid at the very top of their profession, like in the top 5. Therefore, they didn't deliver those type of results. So if they were going to get paid 25th in the nation, then their performance would have sufficed and they would have been paid to the performance that they were delivering. But they were being paid, much like Jim Harbaugh is, to deliver championships. And Mark Richt didn't do that. That's why I didn't. So I made the differentiation between when he was fired at Georgia to say, I think he's doing a decent job there, but he's not being paid to do a decent job. He's being paid top 5 in the nation, so he needs to be competing for SEC and national championships on a fairly regular basis, and he's not doing that, so I completely understand why they would fire him.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up the Jim Harbaugh point too, but yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Moving to today, I think he's kind of going out on a sour note. I mean, I'm not even sure why he waited until a couple days after the bowl game to do it. A couple days after the early signing period. I mean, what's going to happen to the recruits that they did sign? As little as there is.
This might be a positive. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, I guess.
It might be. If they bring in Butch Davis, sure, he's going to be behind the 8 ball and trying to bring in people in. But there might be a complete positive vibe from that transition, because from a public perception standpoint, Mark Richt has botched just about everything in the last year.
I was thinking Lane Kiffin might be an interesting choice for Miami. He's already in Florida, so he knows a lot of contacts for recruiting.
Lane Kiffin just seems like a fit at Miami.
Well, what do you mean? Did you say he would or would not fit?
He just seems like a fit for that program and that location. He does to me.
Yeah, I mean, he left Tennessee after 1 year to head out to LA. So I think going to Miami would be, lifestyle wise, that's probably what he wants.
Absolutely. So, Reasonable Gump, you could and I could guess Georgia's recruiting rankings under Mark Richt. We could, without looking this up, and I'm doing it right now, we both could guess where he was recruiting. He wasn't recruiting at the very top, but I've gone back to 2009. These are his last 7 classes at Georgia. You want to take a stab at it? Because I would have been right there, because it's very easy to predict, I think, where his recruiting classes landed.
If I take into account his performance at Georgia as well as just the hotbed of talent that Georgia is, he could not have been getting lower, he could not have been getting worse than 15. I would say between 10 and 15, maybe averaging 12 or 9 or 10, 9 or 8 a couple times.
There you go. So these are the classes. These are the last 7 going back from 2015 back. 6, 8, 12, 9, 11, 11, 4. He had the 4th ranked recruiting class in 2009, which of course was the team that won the national, or played for the SEC championship and almost beat Bama in 2012. So that makes sense. Those guys were seniors.
Yeah, the seniors, right?
And he had the 7th rated class the year before that. So yeah, he was sitting on talent, and he didn't bring it in quite to the rate Kirby Smart is, where he's got the best class or the 2nd or 3rd best class, but still, I went gone back 2 other years, 7 and 8. So he's in the top 10 almost every year. And the 3 years that he wasn't, he was 11, 11, and 12. So he was pretty much doing his job, bringing in recruits. He wasn't doing an outstanding, unbelievable job, but he was doing a reasonably good job bringing in recruits. And I think then his teams were performing basically about where the recruiting rankings were, about 10th in the country.
I guess I gotta think again. I know recruiting isn't everything, but I think 10th in the country is finishing a little behind where Georgia, as the talent-wise, should be finishing with a good coach. I think with just as much talent as they got in that state, but okay, I'm going to put it this way. I've always said this. There's zero excuse ever for teams. I'm going to name Georgia, Florida, LSU, Texas, USC, for those schools to ever lose more than 2 games a year.
Never.
All of them have enough money to buy good head coaches, so that's not an excuse to say, well, we didn't have a good coach. They all have enough money for it, and they all have all the talent in the world. The only one of those that actually has competition for their talent, really, would be Florida, because they had to split it 3 ways, and now 4 with UCF. Georgia has zero competition in state to their recruits. LSU pretty much has zero competition in state with their recruits. Alabama, by the way, beats out of both of those states a lot. I
do think these kids are more mobile, and they're more globally minded than they used to be. Sure, you have an advantage being in the state. There's no question, but they're more globally minded. Hey, Reasonable Gump, I've got a number of people calling. I'm gonna move on to some other callers, but I appreciate it.
No problem, man.
Thanks, Reasonable Gump. Talk to you later.
Press 1 to start the call or 2 to decline.
All right. It's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line? Hello.
Mark.
Hey. Who is this?
Brian Rockwell calling, brother.
Hey, thanks for calling. I appreciate you calling back.
Hey, no problem, brother. Hey, I got two things for you.
Okay.
Number one, how much was in your mind? And I'll make this really quick because I won't take up much of your time. First question I got for you is, how much pressure do you think Mark Richt had on him to retire? And the second thing is what did you ever find out about Jeff George Jr. out of Pitt? That was all. Have a good rest of your day, buddy.
Oh, boy. Okay, Brian, thanks so much for the call. Oh, I completely lost track of that first or that second comment that he made about Jeff George and Pitt. I got to write that down and look into it. But Bryant, you've got Google just as much as I do here about Jeff George and Pitt. I should go to my Pitt guy, Jim Hammett from used to be at SB Nation. He's at Rivals. That's my Pitt guy to see if Jeff George is out there. Mark Richt, I think he probably received quite a bit of pressure from the administration to retire. That's a guess. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
It's DeAndre. Mark, how you doing?
Hey, DeAndre. Wow, look at this news today.
Yeah, Clemson, Alabama. How you like it?
Oh, boy, you're going to go straight to the game here. Well,
that Notre Dame game, everybody picks on Notre Dame and because of what they used to be. And I want to put it like this. The teams that Notre Dame plays now were traditionally good teams, but a lot of these teams have limitations because of their academics, like Stanford. I mean, I know Stanford has had a lot of great offensive linemen and running backs, but the other skill players, even some defensive linemen, but the
tight ends
skill players are not there. Yeah, tight ends. Yeah, they got
ton of tight ends.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that Stanford is sorry, but I don't never see Stanford winning a national championship. I think the best year I remember was they was like maybe 12-1 with luck. And I know even when John Elway was there, I think the best they ever did was a small bowl. I mean, I don't think there ever was that great. And
no.
Some of the other teams they play, it's hit or miss. I mean, like now I feel about Michigan. People give them way too much credit to me, but some of the teams that are hit or miss. USC's been down, and I know USC's probably going to be back one day, but just sometimes the schedule might be in their favor. Virginia Tech didn't have their starting quarterback. They had a guy that was at Kansas. So that tells you how good he might have been. Thank you. He might not have been that good if he was playing at Kansas to start his career off. But I think I'm not going to be hard on Notre Dame because I don't know. I just don't think they had Clemson's depth. And they played with them for the first quarter. It's just that, Clemson found a mismatch with Ralston, threw the ball down the field, and the guy couldn't keep up with him. Number 11, I don't know who the first touchdown was on. Number 8. I think number 8 was considered to be that best corner coming into the preseason. But then the other guy, I think his name was Love, took over. Mm-hmm. But I just can't wait to see Clemson, Alabama. If Clemson not careful, I think Oklahoma coming back on Alabama. Nick Saban's going to light a fuse on the Alabama, and they're going to come out and play really, really hard. And compared to if Clemson would have just, if Alabama just blew out Oklahoma, I think Nick saw a lot of stuff he didn't like. I didn't get to see much of the game, but I heard there was a lot of personal fouls and stuff in there, and that cost them a lot of touchdowns. So I'm sure Nick's going to get on their butts this coming up week. And hopefully Dexter Lawrence will be able to play.
The game, to a certain extent, and I said this after the game, DeAndre, reminded me of the 2016 Clemson game. Not that Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
The game last night reminded me in just this way, this one small way, reminded me of the Clemson national championship game in 2016 against Alabama, where Alabama came out blazing. They were all over Deshaun Watson, as you recall, and it was 14-0. He had no space to move. No, he was just, there was just an onslaught defensively against Deshaun Watson, and the running game was rolling. Was it Damian Harris in that particular game? No, he took over for Derrick Henry, who got off to a great start in that game.
Right.
Okay. And it was 14-0. Now this was much worse. But what happened was, much like in the Clemson game, once Oklahoma kind of took a breath and started to hit some easy passes, their offense started to get going. Yeah. And Alabama's defense got gassed in both games. And that's what happened last night.
Right. So, Mark, before I let you go, I hear, I know Mark Richt got fired, and I see a lot of people say, Brent Venables. And I'm not saying Kansas State or Texas Tech is better campus than Miami campus or in a better location, because I heard Kansas State, you got to fly to Kansas City and drive 2 hours just to get to the college.
Sure.
There ain't no major airport by it. But Venables is not leaving Clemson, and I think Dabo just started making more money than Brent in the last couple of years. He's not leaving Clemson and stuff like that, and especially, I'm not trying to be funny, but I know Miami, from what I understand, doesn't have that much money to pay their coaches. And so, Mark, I don't see why Venables will leave. Making more than the second or third best coach, depending on who you ask in the country. Why would he leave that job, making more money? And also, I think his son is playing there now, so I think he want to try to coach his son. I don't think his son is an NFL prospect. Yeah, I think he probably want to coach his son the next 3 or 4 years, and I'll see how it goes for him.
All right, DeAndre.
And plus, they got a lot of talent coming in. All right, I think our phones were breaking up earlier, so I'll go back and listen to the podcast and see what you said. You have a great day, sir.
I appreciate it. Our man DeAndre talking Clemson football and the ACC. Reasonable Gum corrected me. Thank you for doing that, because when I spit out Derrick Henry, I wasn't comfortable. Obviously, he won the Heisman in 2015, left Alabama, and in 2016, it was Bo Scarborough. The years run together. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line? I think the call cut off. So whoever just called me, please call back. And I'm probably going to have to go get a charter at some point, because I didn't expect to stay on the line this long. But we had about 200 with us at one point to talk about Mark Richt. So Mark Richt at Georgia. I'm not going to go into details again, because I just did about 10 minutes ago, but I will just clearly state that Kirby Smart is out coaching Mark Richt currently. There's no doubt about that. Look at the recruiting rankings. Look at the last 2 seasons at Georgia versus what Mark Richt typically did at Georgia. Mark Richt's typical year at Georgia was 10-2, 11-2 with a bowl win, or 9-3 with a bowl win, 10-3, something in that range. 9 to 11 wins, finishing anywhere from 8 to 15 in the country. He finished in the top 10 in the country 7 of 15 years he was at Georgia, and finished ranked, I think I counted 11 of 15 years at Georgia. Okay, that was the typical Mark Richt year. And I just read off the recruiting rankings: 6, 8, 12, 9, 11, 11, 4, 7, 8. So he pretty much coached where he recruited. Kirby Smart's recruiting in the top 3 in the nation, and he's finishing basically in the top 3 of the nation. I know that they didn't finish in the top 4, but most people believe they're one of the 4 best teams in the nation. All right, I'll take this call. Mark Richt is not coaching as well as Kirby Smart is right now and accomplishing as much at Georgia, but he is out coaching, or did out coach at Georgia, all those preceding coaches like Jim Donnan and Ray Goff and Vince Dooley near the end. It's not even close. So Mark Richt is not a great coach. He's not an all-time coach. He was a good coach. He did a decent job at Georgia. He did not do a decent job in the end at Miami. Things looked good for close to 2 seasons. He came there, brought credibility, brought recruiting. The recruiting was upgraded. The recruiting rankings bear that out. And don't know why I'm not able to take this call. Let's try this again. Oh, I've got an issue with the speaker. I don't know why this does this. Here we go. Hello, hello. This is odd. I don't know why this is not taking. Whoever was calling me, please try one more time. I have no idea why this is not taking the phone call. I'm going through the same thing that I always go through to answer the call. All right. I'm trying not to miss these phone calls. So people seem to like Butch Davis, Lane Kiffin, Brent Venables, Mario Cristobal. And those are the names that come to mind. Anybody else out there? Somebody mentioned Manny Diaz if he's able to get out of his contract. I don't know that that would be a good look for him. PJ Fleck would be a good fit. Terry Ann McCrite joining us for the live stream with PJ Fleck. Interesting. All right. Slide to open. Speaker. There we go. It's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
McD Sports 4.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Hey, as long as I want classifications, I want to talk about the Miami coach thing.
Absolutely.
Would you consider Mark Richt to be like famously known to go 9-3?
I'm sorry, run that by me again.
Would you consider Mark Richt to famously go 9-3, like typically a 9-3 head coach?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. Like, I'm not saying that's bad or anything, but I'll always remember Mark Richt going 9-3, and that thing at Georgia and Miami. Even though with Miami they haven't been good in years, but definitely at Georgia, 9-3 is not acceptable. That was the Georgia fan. I think Georgia fans, that was their problem, going 9-3.
Okay.
Not saying 9-3 is bad.
Sure. How old are you?
19.
Okay, you're 19 years old. Do you remember anybody coaching Georgia before Mark Richt?
No.
Mark Richt, his run at Georgia for 15 years. And again, I'm not defending it as great by any stretch. The word did not come out of my mouth. I said he did a decent job at Georgia. Is miles better than anything that was done for the 20 to 25 years before him. Or for about 15 years before him.
Okay.
So here are his records at Georgia. So some of them are a lot better than 9-3. Others aren't as good as 9-3, but it's generally in that range. 8-4, 13-1, 11-3, 10-2, 10-3, 9-4, 11-2, 10-3, 8-6, 6-7, 10-4, 12-2, 8-5, 10-3, 9-3.
Typically 9-10 wins.
Yeah. Well, he won double digits 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you've got to kind of count the last year because he didn't coach the bowl game. But 10 out of 15 years, he won double digits.
So let's say 10 wins. Because you know how some of these fan bases are, they expect their teams to go 12-0 every year, win the championship. And I mean, he always had like Georgia fans, I thought, gave him a tough time at times. Like, I know, like, the 7-5 years, I'll probably side a Georgia fan because I'm not a Georgia fan personally or a Miami fan. I'm just looking at Mark Richt. I would always think, like, he always came across to me as like a 9-3, 10-2 coach.
Sure.
Just couldn't get over the hump.
That's what he was.
Which is fine in many programs, like, but not like at the programs he's coaching at.
Sure.
And one other thing I want to say, these people saying Lane Kiffin for the Miami coach just make me laugh harder and harder every time. I would not. If I was a Miami fan, I would not want Lane Kiffin as the coach. I mean, Lane Kiffin's just to me a distraction in and of itself. Like, I would not want Lane Kiffin if I was a Miami fan as the head coach. But that's just me. So that's kind of like the one coach I'm seeing. And like other people are saying Will Muschamp, I mean, I don't see that either. So I don't. To me, Miami, Manny Diaz, you know, I think is Manny Diaz going to Temple? I read in the
Yes.
headlines. Okay. Yeah, they could maybe pry him away from Temple. Maybe. One name I threw in there for fun was Butch Jones. Obviously, I don't think he'll be going to Miami, but there's not really like a big name head coach that on the market. Like I was kind of joking also Urban Meyer if he wants to come out of retirement again, but I mean there's not really like a big name. So like to me Miami's just kind of screwed in a way on the mindset that there's not like a big name head coach. Would you agree with that?
If you want a big name head coach, but some of the more successful coaches in the last 10 or 15 years were not big names when I think it's more about getting the right guy.
Yeah.
Than getting a big name. But people are throwing out some interesting names. They're throwing out, I'm getting some that are, I have an issue with, Rick Neuheisel. I don't know that anyone would want to hire Rick Neuheisel that's planning on winning big, or Mike McCarthy, but somebody like that. But James Franklin, PJ Fleck, Mario Cristobal, those are interesting choices.
Yeah. I don't think Mario Cristobal, I don't think he's going to be leaving Oregon. I don't think James Franklin will leave Penn State. But I'll try for Manny Diaz about Miami. That's probably your best hope.
How about, I'm seeing Dino Babers. I'm seeing Matt Campbell.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they should hire within, maybe try to get Manny Diaz or try to steal a head coach from another program. But I know, but when I saw Lane Kiffin on the chat, I just was like, that would just be a laughing stock for Miami. Like Miami would not be good at all if they hired Lane Kiffin, in my opinion.
Well, Lane Kiffin certainly had an upgrade at Tennessee when he went there for just the one season. They weren't great, but he was showing some promise, and he jumped around. So Lane Kiffin gets a knock for stupid things he said on a regular basis, but that seems maybe the guy's matured a little bit, because we haven't heard anything stupid out of Lane Kiffin for quite a long time. And jumping around jobs and taking just the better job immediately. And I don't know that anybody can fault him for that, unless there are details that I'm unaware of in regards to his statements made publicly in confirming his commitment to a job and then turning his back on the university. But he turned in a 10-2 season at USC, and obviously he's doing a nice job with FAU. Maybe not necessarily this year, but did for his first year or two.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, but I mean, I don't think Lane Kiffin should be a head coach of a Power 5 program in general. The Group of 5 is fine, but not Power 5. I just think that will be a recipe for bad things to come. That's just my opinion, though. But I'm going to let you go. Thanks for taking my call.
Of course. Thanks for calling.
Yeah.
You have a great day. Well, the thing about Lane Kiffin and evaluating what he did at big jobs like Tennessee and USC is that he wasn't there long enough for us to evaluate it. As somebody mentioned in the live chat, USC was on probation when Lane Kiffin was there. So he was fighting through that. And so I don't know that he was in a position where we could fairly evaluate what he would have done at USC. But of course, he had the one big year at 10-2. They were a really good team. Then the next year, they were supposed to be really good. So this would have been 2013 that they opened, depending on your poll, number 1, number 2, number 3 in the country, and they faltered to 7-6. Lost to Georgia Tech in the Sun Bowl. And so they fell apart, and he got fired on the tarmac, coming from Arizona State. after another loss. At Tennessee, things looked good. They looked like a much improved team for the 1 year that he was there. And he went, whatever. I'm guessing 7-6 that 1 year at Tennessee, I believe. But then he left. So we really have an incomplete resume for Lane Kiffin as a coach at the level of Miami, at Tennessee, and at USC. All right, folks. Again, as I mentioned off the top, I was preparing to cut some videos and post some videos on a number of topics. I've got all sorts of stuff running through my head, but the one thing that I found interesting was the comments that Brian Kelly made after the Clemson loss about the athleticism of his team and not being nearly as far behind Clemson and Alabama as his team was in 2012 when they lost to Alabama. And I thought that he was stretching just a bit, or maybe just a lot. And I had some things to say about Brian Kelly's situation at Notre Dame and the talent that he currently has, where they are close and where they're not so close. I think it was pretty evident in the game yesterday. All right. And I think it's also evident that 30-3 would not be the outcome normally, because Clemson's not beating teams of Notre Dame's status and ability and performance on a regular basis 30-3. This Clemson team, though, maybe we'll see when they play Alabama. They may just be that good. But previous Clemson teams, we've seen them lose to Syracuse. We've seen them lose to Pitt. So certainly their ceiling was high, but they also could play down to lesser competition more often than this team did. I do agree with some of the callers that defended Clemson's performance against Syracuse in particular. Although if you're truly an elite team, you're going to take care of a Syracuse even with a backup quarterback situation. But wow, that game, if you go back and watch that game was razor close. They needed a fourth down completion to keep a drive alive to beat Syracuse. Texas A&M's wide receivers were giving Clemson fits in the secondary, and Kellen Mond, granted, he probably played the second half of his life, still, he tore that Clemson secondary to shreds. I think they're much improved now, or they're significantly improved. And of course, we'll talk much about the Alabama-Clemson showdown. That's about a week away. 8 days away from Alabama and Clemson, part 4. All right, everyone. Appreciate you jumping on the live stream. This is one of the more popular ones we've had. Certainly, we've got a strong Miami contingent. And I know that you guys have a number of choices of where to go to talk Miami football and hear about Miami football from more Miami concentrated guys. I'm your national guy who's going to talk about whatever's going on nationally, although I love to grind it down to the specific fan bases. And you see the videos that I post where I really drill it down. I would like to get into the South Carolina football team following their collapse against Virginia and what they have coming back for 2019. I really want to look at Florida football, Michigan football after what we saw yesterday as well, projecting toward 2019. I was able to do that with a number of teams early in the bowl season where I didn't so much recap the bowl game, although I did to a certain extent, but I played it off more in terms of what are we seeing that we're going to see projecting toward 2019 in terms of talent coming back, talent lost, and the schedule with an eye toward the non-conference schedule in September. All right, keep it locked in here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I appreciate everyone who reminds the other folks in the chat and who watch the videos to please like the videos. So, for example, I had a lot to say about Mark Richt, and I hope I was clear on my evaluation of Mark Richt. I'm not giving him an A+. I'm not putting him on the Mount Rushmore of college football. Nowhere close to that. I was merely stating that he did a decent job at Georgia, that he won consistently there, that he was not able to do what he was paid to do, and that was deliver championships. He was paid top 5 money. He was not delivering. And when you're top 5 money, you should be delivering SEC contention all the time. And he was more like a Florida loss away from, well, the season's no longer relevant in November, but we're playing well and we're going to win more games and finish in a decent bowl game and go 11-2 or 10-3. But we lost that key game to Florida, which totally knocked us out of SEC championship and national championship consideration. And that was a typical Mark Richt season. And I get it. If I was running the program at Georgia, I would have made the same decision. I would have said, Mark Richt, you did a fine job here at Georgia. You were so much better than your predecessors for 15 years before you, but we are paying you top 5 money, and we've given you a long leash for several years, and you keep tantalizing and teasing us with really good seasons, and you haven't delivered. Therefore, bye. So I would have made the same decision at Georgia. Georgia should expect to contend for national championships, and now they are with Kirby Smart in play. At Miami, for whatever reason, the wheels came off. Mark Richt stepped in, and Dennis Wilson didn't allow me to finish my point because he jumped on my comment about credibility. I'm talking about perceived credibility. Miami's been a train wreck compared to the expectations for a long time. They hired Mark Richt. They at least knew that he wasn't going to run afoul considering NCAA issues at Miami, and they knew that he would at least win consistently. That's what they thought. They had reason to believe that. We all did. And so he takes over a team that was decent, and his first season wasn't spectacular, but it finished well with a bowl win and several consecutive wins, finishing 9-4, roughly top 15 in the country. And then he starts out the next year 10-0. And sure, there were signs of issues, but he did bring in a strong recruiting class, I think 8th in the nation. Then he brings in another strong recruiting class, even off the heels of a disappointing finish, but most of us considered it understandable. They lost to a really good Wisconsin team, one of the top 6 or 7 teams in the country, by 10 points in the Orange Bowl. They lost to Pitt. Sure, that's inexcusable in a sense, but Clemson won a national championship and lost to Pitt. Clemson went to the college football playoff and lost to Syracuse, who went 4-8. So those things happen. Again, not good, but let's not fire the guy over losing to Pitt. All right. The game that really started to make me think that, okay, this is not trending well for 2018 was the Clemson game, actually. And you would think that that would be the mulligan. You would think, well, they were playing Clemson. Clemson's great. They're one of the top 4 or 5 teams in the country. They lost 38-3. They should have competed in that game. Sure, they should have lost to Clemson, but they should have lost by 14 points. That should have been a 2-score game. They should have been able to show up with their type of talent and make it a competitive game. Lose 30-17, not get annihilated 21-0 out of the gate and lose 38-3. That was the game that gave me reservation toward 2018. But I still was a sucker that picked them to go 10-2. And I had a number of Miami fans telling me, are you crazy? Look at that schedule. They're going to go 12-0. They're going to go 11-1. And I said, well, 10-2. And I'm not even thinking more like 9-3. And I think I did say that they would lose to Boston College. And I was thinking that they would drop 2 other games. So I was on that 9-3, 10-2 range. And what it came down to was an archaic offense that he refused to correct and completely mishandling, for what reason I still can't figure out, hitching his wagon to Malik Rocher and continuing to throw him out there. I know that N'Kosi Perry had issues off the field. And I know that Jaron Williams probably showed in practice that he was not grasping the offense to the point that he could get out there comfortably and run the show on the field on game day. But to name Malik Rocher the starting quarterback coming off of those 3 awful games at the end of 2017, not to even let those guys just flat out compete through the spring, through the individual workouts in the summer, and through August, I thought was the beginning of the end. That was when he just botched a huge situation that obviously, as the quarterback battle is, that is a coaching situation that gains public scrutiny as much as anything else. The wins and losses and the recruiting wars is how you handle the quarterback situation. And he just did a poor job. And then he's yanking them back and forth. And it's not making much sense as to his decision through the season. And that's where it came off the rails. And then that, along with the 7-5 finish before the bowl game, resulted in a bad recruiting finish, at least for the early signing period. And so the news has been all negative going back to the Pitt game. Lose 3 straight games, have a decent recruiting haul. So I shouldn't say all bad. The 2018 class was top 15 in the nation, maybe higher than that. But losing the last 3 games of the season and staying with a quarterback who was clearly incapable of delivering, and then botching the quarterback situation repeatedly throughout the season and losing to teams that you shouldn't lose to against a marginal schedule. They didn't play a good schedule. Give them an SEC schedule, they would have went 4-8. They got to play Georgia Tech and Duke and Pitt and Virginia Tech and a bad non-conference schedule outside of LSU. They get to play 3 very winnable games of teams that can't compete with Miami talent. So the schedule was already made for a big season, and they still botched it up at 7-5, and then they got blown out by Wisconsin and just didn't look like, well, the offense was a disaster again against Wisconsin, and I talked about that off the top in regards to their lack of preparation and just it being such a predictable offense to scheme against for Wisconsin. And all of that taken into consideration, bad finish to 17, bad performance in 18, bad handling of the quarterback situation, archaic offense that culminated with a game in which they only scored 3 points against a Wisconsin defense that was not good this year, that was coming off a game in which they gave up 35 to Minnesota. All that put together shows that Mark Richt, for whatever reason, suddenly was not the CEO that he had been at Georgia and at the beginning at Miami. That's my take. We could talk about this forever. I appreciate the support, the comments, the likes, of course, and of course, the views and the shares. And join us right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, as we get everyone set for Clemson, Alabama, Part 4. Plus, my postseason looks at the number of games, the number of teams that have concluded their seasons. And, of course, we still have a full slate on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. So check out the videos. We've previewed just about all those games already, and we'll get to as many as possible. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. If you have a comment or a suggestion for me or a request, I will not see it in the live chat, but just send me a comment to any of the videos. So go to any of the videos and leave your comment if you want me to see it there at any of the videos. Please subscribe and sign up for the newsletter. It's free. Comes out every Monday. The voice of college football. Just send your email address to mine at MarkRogersTV@gmail.com. And we will see you guys soon.